The eviction notice fluttered against Maya Chen's apartment door like a dying moth, its pink paper bright as a warning against the peeling paint. She stood in the hallway, clutching her 8-year-old daughter's hand, grocery bags cutting circulation in her other arm, watching her landlord's crude handwriting blur through tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of Emma. "Mama, why does that paper look angry?" Emma's voice carried that particular mix of innocence and intuition that always caught Maya off guard. Her daughter had inherited her father's gift for reading between lines, seeing things others missed. "It's just business stuff, sweetheart." Maya fumbled for her keys, the metal cold against her fingertips. The November wind whipped through the broken heating system of their building, carrying with it the scent of impending snow and the bitter taste of another Chicago winter they couldn't afford. "Let's get inside and make some hot chocolate." The apartment felt smaller each day, as if the walls were slowly closing in. Maya had taken to measuring their life in square feet, 643 of them to be exact. She'd counted during those sleepless nights when the math of survival kept spinning through her mind like a broken record. Rent, utilities, groceries, Emma's school supplies, her own community college tuition that she'd been stretching across 3 years now. Numbers that never quite added up, no matter how many double shifts she pulled at the diner. Emma dropped her backpack by the door with the practiced efficiency of a child who'd learned early that home was something you held lightly, ready to move at a moment's notice. They'd lived in 4 different places in 3 years, each one smaller than the last, each one another step down a ladder Maya had never intended to climb. "Mrs. Patterson says there's going to be a science fair next month." Emma's voice carried hope the way other children carried lunchboxes, carefully, protectively. "I want to make a volcano." Maya smiled despite everything, kneeling to help Emma out of her winter coat. The fabric was getting thin at the elbows, and Maya made a mental note to check the thrift stores this weekend. "A volcano sounds perfect, baby. We'll make it the best volcano in the whole school." The lie came easily now. She'd become fluent in the language of false promises, in painting tomorrow brighter than today's reality suggested. But seeing Emma's face light up, watching her daughter's world expand even as their own contracted, made every sleepless night worth it. The phone rang as Maya was heating milk on the stove, the old appliance making the warning sounds that meant another repair bill was lurking around the corner. She almost didn't answer. Creditors had her number memorized by now, but something made her reach for it. "Maya Chen?" The voice was crisp, professional, carrying the kind of authority that made her stomach tighten. "Speaking." "This is Gerald Pemberton from Pemberton Hayes & Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Lily Chen. I believe she was your great-aunt?" Maya's hand tightened on the receiver. She barely remembered Great-Aunt Lily, a distant relative who had appeared at family gatherings like a ghost from another era, always dressed in outdated elegance, always watching everything with sharp, calculating eyes. The kind of woman who seemed to carry secrets like jewelry, visible but untouchable. "She passed away 2 weeks ago. I apologize for the delay in contacting you, but her will, well, it's quite specific. She's left you your property in Millbrook Township, about 40 minutes outside the city." Maya felt the world tilt slightly. "Left me what?" 37 acres, including a house built in 1897. The property's been in your family for generations, though it's been unoccupied for nearly 15 years. His voice carried a note of something. Warning, perhaps. "I should mention, Miss Chen, the property comes with certain obligations. Your aunt was very particular about the terms." The milk boiled over, hissing against the burner. Maya barely noticed. "What kind of obligations?" "Perhaps we should discuss this in person. Are you available tomorrow afternoon? There are documents to sign, and I think you should understand what you're inheriting before you make any decisions." That night, after Emma had fallen asleep clutching the stuffed elephant that had seen them through every move, Maya sat at their tiny kitchen table with the eviction notice spread before her like a tarot card promising bad fortune. 30 days to come up with 3 months back rent or find somewhere else to go. Her savings account showed $247.33. Her checking account was worse. But somewhere, outside Chicago apparently, sat a house with her name on it, 40 minutes away from everything she'd built, everything she'd failed to build. A house that came with obligations she didn't understand, from a great-aunt who'd barely acknowledged her existence. Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine it for a moment. Emma running through rooms bigger than their entire apartment, a yard where she could plant that garden she dreamed about, space to breathe. Then reality crashed back in. Old houses meant old problems, repairs that couldn't afford, taxes she'd never considered, utilities for spaces they didn't need. She was still sitting there when the first snow began to fall. Tiny flakes catching the streetlight outside their window like diamonds scattered across velvet. Each flake is unique, each one melting the moment it touched ground. Like hopes, she thought, like chances you don't see coming until they're already gone. If this story of unexpected inheritance has caught your attention, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more incredible family discovery stories. The next afternoon, Pemberton's office felt like stepping into another century. Dark wood, leather chairs, the kind of substantial furniture that spoke of money older than memory. Gerald Pemberton himself looked like he'd been carved from the same wood as his desk, weathered, solid, carrying the weight of other people's secrets. Your great-aunt was an interesting woman. He placed a thick manila folder between them. She lived alone on that property for 63 years, never married, rarely came to town. The house has been in your family since 1897, passed down through the women on your grandmother's side. Maya felt Emma's small hand slip into hers. She'd had to bring her daughter. Childcare was another expense she couldn't manage. Emma sat quietly, coloring in a book Pemberton's secretary had provided. But Maya knew she was listening to every word. What exactly are these obligations you mentioned? Pemberton opened the folder, revealing documents that looked official enough to change lives. Your aunt believed very strongly that the property should remain in the family. The will stipulates that you must live on the property for a minimum of 1 year before you can sell it, and if you do sell— He paused, studying her face. Half of any proceeds must be donated to the Millbrook Historical Preservation Society. Maya's heart sank. What's the property worth? Honestly, not much. The house needs significant work. We're talking foundation issues, electrical that hasn't been updated since the 1940s, plumbing that, well, let's just say it's creative. The land itself is worth something, but with all the restrictions your aunt placed on it— He shrugged. Maybe $50,000, $60,000, if you're lucky. Emma looked up from her coloring book. Mama, is that the house where we're going to make my volcano? The innocence in her daughter's voice nearly broke Maya's composure. She squeezed Emma's hand gently. We're just talking about it, sweetheart. Pemberton leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly as he watched Emma color. There's one more thing, Ms. Chen. Your aunt left a letter for you. She was very specific that you should read it only after you'd seen the property. He handed her a sealed envelope, heavy paper that felt expensive between her fingers. Her name was written across the front in spidery handwriting that seemed to quiver with age or urgency. I can arrange for you to visit the property this weekend if you'd like. The key is here. He placed an old-fashioned skeleton key on the desk between them, the kind that looked like it belonged in a fairy tale. But I should warn you, the house has been empty for 15 years. It's going to need work, a lot of work. Maya stared at the key, at the documents, at her daughter's hopeful face. Outside, Chicago hummed with the sound of traffic and ambition and lives being lived at breakneck speed. Somewhere, 40 minutes away, sat a house that might be a shelter or might be a beautiful trap, depending on how you looked at it. Can I think about it? Of course, but Ms. Chen, Your aunt was very insistent on timing. She believed the property was meant to provide for family in times of need. She seemed to think those times were coming sooner than anyone expected. That evening, Maya sat in their tiny living room with the envelope in her hands, Emma curled against her watching a movie on their old laptop. The eviction notice still sat on the kitchen table, pink and final, and impossible to ignore. 27 days left. 27 days to come up with money she didn't have or make a decision that could change everything. She thought about Great Aunt Lily, about the few memories she had of family gatherings where the old woman had sat slightly apart, watching everything with those sharp eyes. There had been stories, whispered conversations between her parents about Lily's eccentricities, about the old house and its history. But Maya had been young then, more interested in cousins her own age than in family legends. Now, holding the letter that might contain answers or might simply deepen the mystery, she wondered what Lily had seen in her. What made a woman who barely knew her choose Maya as the inheritor of something that had been in the family for over a century? "Mama," Emma's sleepy voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Are we going to see the house this weekend?" Maya looked down at her daughter, at the face that held so much trust, so much hope for better tomorrows. Emma deserved a yard to play in, rooms of her own, the kind of stability that didn't come with eviction notices and midnight calculations of whether they could afford both groceries and heat. "Yes, baby," Maya heard herself say, "we're going to see the house." Emma smiled, the kind of pure joy that made Maya's chest tight with love and fear in equal measure. Outside, snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, a house waited with its secrets intact, its obligations unclear, and its promise hanging in the air like snow. Beautiful, transformative, and potentially dangerous if you weren't prepared for what it might bring. The house squatted against the November sky like a wounded animal, its Victorian bones still proud despite the peeling paint and missing shutters. Maya pulled their rusted Honda into the overgrown driveway, the car's exhaust visible in the cold air, and felt her heart sink into her stomach. This wasn't salvation. This was just another kind of trap, dressed up in gingerbread trim and false promises. "Wow," Emma breathed from the passenger seat, her nose pressed against the window. "It looks like a castle, Mama." Maya wished she could see it through her daughter's eyes. The romance of the tower room, the adventure of the wraparound porch, the fairy tale potential of the gardens gone wild. But all she could see were dollar signs bleeding from every broken board, every cracked window, every shingle that hung like a loose tooth ready to fall. "It's big," Maya managed, turning off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of decision. They sat there for a moment, mother and daughter, staring at the inheritance that might save them or might swallow them whole. The skeleton key turned in the lock with surprising ease, as if the house had been waiting for them. The front door swung open with a groan that sounded almost human, revealing a foyer that stretched upward into shadow. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through grimy windows, and the air tasted of neglect and something else, something older, mustier, like secrets left too long in the dark. Emma's footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as she ran ahead, her voice bouncing off walls that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. "Look, Mama, there's a staircase that goes up and up and up." Maya followed more cautiously, her phone's flashlight cutting through the gloom. The house was a maze of rooms that seemed to serve no modern purpose. A morning room, a parlor, a library with empty shelves that stretched to the ceiling like the bones of forgotten stories. Each room held furniture draped in white sheets, ghost furniture that made her skin crawl, even as Emma delighted in pulling away the coverings like she was unwrapping presents. "And look at this!" Emma's voice came from somewhere deeper in the house. Maya followed the sound through a dining room that could seat 12, past a kitchen that belonged in a museum, to a sunroom where her daughter stood transfixed. The back wall was entirely windows, or had been once. Now half the glass was spider-webbed with cracks, and the view beyond showed what had been gardens stretching toward a line of trees that marked the property's border. But it was the afternoon light streaming through the remaining glass that caught Maya's breath, golden and thick as honey, transforming the dust and decay into something almost magical. "We could put your art supplies here, Mama, and I could do my homework at that little table, and we could watch the sunset every day." Maya's chest tightened. She hadn't painted in 3 years, hadn't even thought about art since the divorce, since survival had become the only priority. But standing in that ruined sunroom with light pouring over everything like liquid gold, she felt something stir that she thought was dead forever. "The electricity's been turned off," Maya said more to herself than to Emma. "And probably the water, too. And look at this floor. Those boards are warped from water damage. The roof must leak." But Emma was already running toward the staircase, her footsteps light and quick on the worn carpet runner. "I want to see the power room." Maya followed, her practical mind cataloging problems with each step. The banister wobbled under her hand. The third step from the top groaned ominously. The wallpaper in the hallway peeled away from the walls like old skin, revealing patches of plaster that crumbled at her touch. The second floor held 6 bedrooms, each one larger than their entire apartment. Emma claimed the tower room immediately, spinning in circles in the circular space, while Maya counted the windows that would need replacing, the radiators that probably hadn't worked in decades, and the electrical fixtures that looked like fire hazards waiting to happen. "We can make this my room, and you can have the big one with the fireplace, and maybe we can make one of the other rooms into a library and one into an art studio, and—" Emma's voice tumbled over each other like water over stones, each plan more elaborate than the last. Maya sat on the window seat in what had apparently become Emma's room, looking out over the property that was now impossibly theirs. Theirs with conditions, with obligations, with a year-long commitment that felt like a prison sentence dressed up in a gift. Her phone buzzed, a text from her manager at the diner. "Need to know by Monday if you're taking the extra shifts this month. Jimmy's asking for more hours." Reality crashed back in like cold water. She couldn't commute from here to the city every day, not with gas prices, not with the car already making sounds that suggested expensive repairs in the near future. She'd have to find work locally, in a town she'd driven through exactly once and knew nothing about. "Mama, what's this?" Emma had found a door she'd somehow missed, painted the same color as the walls and nearly invisible except for its brass handle. Maya joined her daughter, turning the handle to reveal a narrow staircase leading up into darkness. "I think it goes to the attic." They climbed together, Maya's phone light revealing rough wooden steps and walls that felt like they were closing in. The attic was a long, low space that ran the length of the house, filled with the kinds of treasures that accumulated over generations. Trunks and boxes, furniture too good to throw away but too old-fashioned to use, picture frames with glass that caught their light and threw it back in fragments. But it was the far end of the attic that made Maya's breath catch. Someone had set up an easel there, positioned to catch the north light from a single window. Canvases leaned against the rafters, dozens of them, covered by a dusty tarp that Emma was already trying to lift. "Don't touch anything," Maya said quickly, but her daughter had already pulled the tarp aside. The paintings underneath took Maya's breath away. There were landscapes mostly, but landscapes painted with the kind of skill that spoke of formal training and years of practice. Rolling hills under storm clouds, forests in deep shadow, gardens in full bloom, all painted with a technique that was both classical and deeply personal. "They're beautiful," Emma whispered. "Who made them?" Maya turned over one of the canvases, looking for a signature. There, in the corner, painted in letters so small they were almost invisible, L. Chen, 1987. Lily! Great Aunt Lily had been an artist. Maya felt something shift inside her chest, a recognition that went deeper than surprise. These paintings weren't just skillful, they were passionate, alive with the kind of vision that Maya had always dreamed of having. Lily had lived in this house for 63 years, painting the world around her, building something beautiful in this attic studio while the rest of the house slowly decayed around her. "Mama, are you crying?" Maya wiped her eyes, not even aware that tears had started. "Just dust, baby. It's dusty up here." But it wasn't dust. It was the weight of inheritance that had nothing to do with property or obligations, and everything to do with the recognition that she wasn't the first woman in her family to feel the pull of creation, the need to capture beauty even in the middle of struggle. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring, Emma claiming territories while Maya's mind spun with calculations she couldn't make work. By the time they locked up and started the drive back to the city, the sun was setting behind them, painting the sky the same colors Maya had seen in Lily's paintings. "Are we going to live there?" Emma asked as they pulled onto the highway. Maya didn't answer immediately. The smart thing would be to walk away, to let the property sit empty for another 15 years while she figured out some other solution to their problems. To not take on the enormous risk of trying to make a life in a house that needed everything fixed and a town where she knew no one. But the alternative was 25 more days until eviction. 25 days to find money she didn't have or a miracle she couldn't count on. "What do you think?" she asked Emma instead of answering directly. Emma was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. "I think Great Aunt Lily left it to us because she knew we needed it. And I think maybe she was waiting a long time for the right people to take care of it." That night, Maya lay awake in their tiny bedroom while Emma slept beside her, the sealed letter from Lily heavy in her hands. She'd been carrying it all day, feeling its weight in her purse like a talisman or a warning. Outside, the city hummed with its constant motion, but Maya found herself thinking about the silence of the house, the way the light had looked in that sunroom, the possibility of space to breathe. She opened the letter carefully, the paper crackling like autumn leaves. "My dear Maya, if you're reading this, then the house has found its way to you and you found your way to the house. This is how it was always meant to be. The women in our family have always known when it was time to pass things along. I know the house seems like a burden. I know you're probably calculating repair costs and wondering if I've left you a gift or a curse. Both, perhaps. The best gifts usually are. I've been watching our family from a distance for many years, and I see in you something that reminds me of myself at your age. The weight of responsibility that threatens to crush creativity. The way survival can make you forget that you're allowed to dream. The house needs work. More work than you can probably afford right now. But houses, like people, can survive a lot more than we think they can. Start with what's necessary. Heat, water, safety for Emma. The rest will come when it comes. There are things in the house that might help. I've left accounts with local businesses, enough to cover basic utilities and repairs for the first year. The details are in the desk in the library, second drawer down, behind the false back. But more than that, I'm leaving you space. Space to remember who you were before life taught you to be small. Space for Emma to grow wild and free the way children should. Space for both of you to discover what you're capable of when you're not just surviving. The house has been in our family for 5 generations, Maya. It's seen births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows, dreams made real and dreams deferred. It's strong enough to hold whatever you bring to it. Trust the house. Trust yourself. Trust that sometimes the best things come disguised as problems too big to solve. With love and hope for your bright future, Great Aunt Lily. P.S. Check the pantry shelves. I may have left a few surprises. Maya read the letter 3 times before the words really sunk in. Accounts at local businesses? Money she hadn't known about? Help she hadn't expected? Not enough to fix everything, probably, but enough to make the impossible seem merely difficult. She looked at Emma, sleeping beside her daughter's face peaceful in the streetlight coming through their thin curtains. In 3 weeks, they'd have to leave this apartment, whether they had somewhere to go or not. She could spend those 3 weeks frantically searching for something they could afford in a city that was pricing them out, or she could take the leap into something unknown, but undeniably theirs. Maya reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found her manager's number. Before she could talk herself out of it, she typed, "Hi, Janet. I need to talk to you about reducing my hours. Major life changes are coming up. Can we discuss Monday?" She hit send before she could reconsider. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about towers and gardens and volcanoes. Maya smoothed her daughter's hair gently, thinking about the way the light had looked in that sunroom, about Lily's paintings hidden in the attic, and about the possibility of a life that was about more than just getting by. The house was a risk, but staying where they were was a guarantee that nothing would change, that Emma would keep measuring her dreams against their limitations, that Maya would keep painting her life in shades of gray and calling it responsible. Maybe it was time to risk a little color. Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine it. Emma running through rooms that echoed with laughter instead of worry, the sunroom filled with canvases and light, the smell of dinner cooking in a kitchen big enough to invite friends they hadn't met yet. A life that felt like living instead of just surviving. Outside, the city hummed its endless song of ambition and motion, but for the first time in years, Maya found herself listening instead to silence, to possibility, to the sound of doors opening instead of closing. Tomorrow, she'd call the utility companies. Tomorrow, she'd research schools in Millbrook Township and mechanics who might be able to keep their car running a little longer. Tomorrow, she'd start the complicated process of unraveling the life they'd built and rebuilding it somewhere else entirely. But tonight, she held her daughter close and let herself believe that sometimes the best gifts really did come disguised as problems too big to solve. If you're enjoying Maya and Emma's journey so far, don't forget to share this amazing story with friends and family who love tales of hidden treasures and family mysteries. Moving day arrived with the kind of bitter December cold that made Chicago feel like an endurance test. Maya stood in the empty apartment that had been their home for 8 months, the longest they'd stayed anywhere since the divorce, watching the last of their possessions disappear into the back of a rented truck that cost more than she wanted to think about. "It looks so small when it's empty," Emma observed, her breath visible in the unheated space. The landlord had turned off the heat the moment Maya gave notice, another petty cruelty in a relationship that had been built on mutual desperation from the start. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Everything they owned fit into a truck smaller than some people's closets, and even that felt optimistic. She'd sold what she could: the couch that had seen better decades, the kitchen table that wobbled, the television that was more static than picture. Every dollar from those sales had gone toward the moving truck, the deposits for utilities at the new house, the 100 small expenses that accumulated like snow, silent and inexorable. The drive to Millbrook Township felt like crossing into another country. The city's urgency gave way to suburbs, then farmland, then something that felt almost ancient: rolling hills covered in snow, old barns that leaned against the wind like tired dancers, and finally the turnoff onto Maple Grove Road that led to what was now, impossibly, home. The moving truck got stuck twice in the driveway. Maya's Honda, loaded with everything that couldn't fit in the truck, made worrying sounds climbing the slight hill to the house. But when they finally pulled up to the Victorian mansion that looked even more imposing under its blanket of snow, Emma pressed her face to the window and whispered, "We're really here." The first week was a symphony of small disasters. The main water line had frozen sometime in the past 2 weeks, leaving them without running water until Maya could find a plumber willing to work during the holidays. The furnace wheezed and groaned before giving up entirely on their third night, sending them to sleep in the one bedroom with a working fireplace, huddled together under every blanket they owned. Maya found Lily's accounts exactly where the letter had promised, tucked behind the false back of the library desk's second drawer. Enough money to cover basic utilities for a year, repairs that couldn't wait, and a small buffer for emergencies. Not wealth, but breathing room, which felt like the same thing after years of financial suffocation. But it was the nights that began to unsettle her. The house was full of sounds, settling timbers, wind through gaps in the weather stripping, the old radiators gurgling to life when the heating system finally cooperated. Normal old house sounds, Maya told herself, nothing more. Except that sometimes the sounds seemed to have pattern, purpose. Footsteps in the hallway outside their bedroom that stopped the moment Maya sat up to listen. Doors that she was certain she'd left open, standing closed in the morning. And once, memorably, the sound of piano music drifting from the parlor at 3 in the morning. A melody she didn't recognize, played on a piano she'd covered with a sheet because half the keys stuck. "Did you hear that?" Emma asked one morning over breakfast in the kitchen, where Maya had set up a camping stove because the old gas range was too dangerous to use until someone could service it. "Hear what, sweetheart?" "She has a pretty voice, but she sounds sad." Maya felt ice form in her stomach. "What lady?" Emma shrugged, returning to her cereal. "I don't know. She sings sometimes at night, in the tower room, I think. But when I go look, she's never there." Maya made a mental note to schedule Emma for a pediatric evaluation. Stress could manifest in strange ways in children, and this move had been enormous for both of them. But that night, as she lay in the master bedroom listening to the house breathe around them, she heard it too. A voice, distant and mournful, carrying a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. She found herself walking the halls at night, flashlight in hand, checking locks that didn't need checking, investigating sounds that always stopped just before she reached them. The house felt alive around her, watching, waiting for something she couldn't name. It was during one of these midnight wanderings that she discovered the door. Maya had been living in the house for 2 weeks and thought she'd explored every room, every closet, every corner of their new home. But standing in the hallway outside the library at 2 in the morning, she noticed something she'd somehow missed before. A door set so flush with the wall that it was nearly invisible in daylight, completely hidden in shadow. The door wasn't locked, though it should have been. The narrow staircase beyond led down into darkness, the air growing colder with each step. Maya's flashlight revealed stone walls, much older than the house above, and she realized she was descending into the original foundation, or perhaps something even older. The basement room she found was unlike anything she'd expected. The walls were lined with shelves that held jars and bottles filled with things she couldn't identify in the dim light. Dried herbs hung in bundles from the ceiling, and along the far wall, carved directly into the stone, were symbols that looked older than America itself, older than the house, older than anything that should exist in suburban Illinois. Maya backed away, her heart hammering. She'd found Lily's real secret, not just an artist, but something else, something that made her skin crawl even as her rational mind insisted there had to be an explanation. Herbal remedies, maybe, a hobby, an interest in history or folklore or something equally mundane. But the symbols on the wall seemed to move in her flashlight beam, and the air tasted of things she didn't want to name. She sealed the door the next morning, moving a heavy bookshelf in front of it and telling herself she'd explore it properly later, when she had better lighting, when Emma wasn't in the house to ask questions Maya couldn't answer. But the sealed room seemed to change the house around it. Doors that had been merely stubborn became actively resistant. Lights flickered without explanation. The heating system developed a pattern of turning itself off at exactly 3:17 a.m. every night, leaving them to wake in rooms that felt cold enough to see their breath. And the accidents began. Small things at first. Maya slipped on the main staircase, catching herself on the banister just as several of the balusters gave way with rotten snaps that sounded like breaking bones. Emma found a mouse in her cereal box, not unusual in an old house, except that the box had been sealed, purchased just the day before. The kitchen faucet began running red water. Maya called the plumber, who found nothing wrong with the pipes, no rust or sediment that could explain the discoloration. "Old houses," he said with a shrug. "Sometimes they just do things." But the red water only ran when Maya used the kitchen sink. When Emma turned on the same faucet, the water ran clear and cold. The incidents escalated. Maya woke one morning to find every mirror in the house spider-webbed with cracks, though none of them had actually broken. The glass held in its frames like frozen lightning, creating fractured reflections that seemed to show movement even when she stood perfectly still. Emma began having nightmares. Not the usual childhood fears, but dreams she described in detail that made Maya's blood run cold. Dreams of women in old-fashioned dresses walking through the house, of voices calling her name from rooms she'd never seen, of something buried beneath the house that wanted to be found. "It's not scary," she insisted when Maya asked if she wanted to talk to someone about the dreams. "They're just lonely. They've been waiting for us to come home." Home. The word felt increasingly wrong in Maya's mouth. This wasn't home. This was something else, something that had been wearing the mask of refuge long enough that she'd fallen for the disguise. Maya began researching the house's history, spending hours at the Millbrook Township library when Emma was at school. What she found didn't comfort her. The house had been built by Maya Chen, her great-great-grandfather, in 1897, but Jeremiah had only lived there for 3 years before disappearing without a trace, leaving behind a wife and 2 young daughters. The wife, Constance, had remarried quickly, suspiciously quickly according to the local gossip preserved in old newspaper columns. After that, the house passed through the female line, mother to daughter, for 5 generations, but the pattern was disturbing. Every generation had seen early deaths, mysterious disappearances, or women who simply left, packed up in the middle of the night, and never came back, leaving the house to sit empty until the next desperate woman in the family needed shelter. Only Lily had broken the pattern, living in the house for 63 years until her death. But even Lily had never married, never had children, never seemed to have built the kind of life most people would call normal. Maya found herself wondering if the house didn't just shelter the women in her family, if it consumed them. The thought was ridiculous, the kind of superstitious nonsense that belonged in movies, not real life. Houses were wood and stone and glass. They didn't have appetites. They didn't make choices. But on her 3rd week in the house, Maya awoke to find her Honda sitting in the driveway with all 4 tires slashed. The police officer who responded was a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He took notes with the kind of professional skepticism that suggested he'd written this off as vandalism before he'd even seen the car. "Any idea who might want to cause you trouble? Ex-husband, maybe? Neighborhood kids?" Maya shook her head. She'd been divorced for 4 years, and her ex-husband was living in California with his new wife and their twin boys, the family he'd decided he wanted after deciding he didn't want Maya and Emma. And there were no neighborhood kids. Their nearest neighbor was half a mile away, an elderly farmer who'd brought them a casserole and a warning about the house's peculiarities when they'd first moved in. "The thing is," the officer said, crouching beside the Honda, "these cuts are weird, too clean, too precise, almost like they were made with surgical instruments." He stood up, brushing snow from his knees. "I'll file a report, but honestly, without witnesses or cameras, you might want to think about getting some security lights installed. Old houses like this, sitting alone out here, they can attract attention." After he left, Maya stood in the driveway, staring at her ruined car, calculating expenses she couldn't afford, and wondering if this was the house's way of making sure she couldn't leave. The tires alone would cost more than she had in checking. The tow truck to get the car to a repair shop would be another expense she hadn't budgeted for. She was trapped, not just financially now, but literally. No car meant no way to get to job interviews in town. No way to take Emma anywhere they needed to go. No escape if things got worse. And things were getting worse. That night, Maya awoke to the sound of Emma screaming. She found her daughter standing in the tower room, her nightgown soaked with sweat, staring at the wall where Emma had hung her drawings from school. Every single drawing had been altered. The happy stick figures of their family had been joined by shadow figures, drawn in what looked like charcoal, but felt wrong under Maya's fingers, too warm, too soft, like something organic. "They wanted me to see," Emma whispered, still staring at the walls. "They wanted me to know they're here too." Maya pulled her daughter close, feeling Emma's small body trembling against her. "Who wanted you to see, baby?" "The ladies, the ones who lived here before us. They've been waiting so long, Mama. They want us to stay forever." Maya carried Emma to the master bedroom, where they spent the rest of the night huddled together while the house creaked and settled around them with sounds that no longer seemed random, purposeful sounds, deliberate sounds. The sounds of something that had been patient for a very long time and was running out of patience. By morning, Maya had made a decision. Whatever was happening in this house, psychological pressure from the stress of the move, some kind of environmental factor she didn't understand, or something worse, she couldn't let it continue. Not with Emma involved, not with her daughter's safety at stake. She would find a way to leave. Sell the house regardless of Lily's conditions, take whatever financial loss was necessary, get Emma somewhere safe and normal and boring. Somewhere that didn't come with obligations and mysteries and shadow figures drawn in charcoal that felt alive under her fingers. But when Maya went to call Pemberton's office that morning, she discovered the phone line had been cut. Not damaged by weather or age. Cut. Cleanly, deliberately, leaving them isolated in a house that seemed increasingly determined to keep them. And when she tried to use her cell phone, she found there was no signal. Not weak signal, not intermittent coverage, nothing. As if the house existed in a dead zone that hadn't been there when they'd first visited. Maya stood in the kitchen, holding her useless phone, and realized that leaving might not be as simple as making a decision. The house had other ideas. Outside, snow began to fall again. Heavy flakes that would soon make the roads impassable even if she had a car to drive. The forecast called for a major storm, the kind that could leave them snowed in for days. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her nightgown, her face pale but determined. "Mama, I think they want to show us something." "Who wants to show us something?" "The ladies. They've been trying to tell us, but we haven't been listening right." Emma took Maya's hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "There's something important, something about why we're really here." Maya wanted to refuse, wanted to bundle Emma up and walk away from the house regardless of storms or slashed tires or impossibility. But looking into her daughter's eyes, she saw something that made her hesitate. Not fear. Emma should have been terrified after everything that had happened. Instead, she looked expectant, like someone who'd finally understood the punchline to a very long joke. "What do they want to show us?" Maya asked against her better judgment. Emma smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had seen from her since the nightmares started. "The secret, Mama. The real reason Great Aunt Lily left us the house. The reason we don't have to be scared anymore." Outside, the storm intensified, and the house seemed to hold its breath around them. Whatever was coming, whatever revelation Emma believed was waiting for them, Maya realized they were about to discover whether their inheritance was salvation or something far more dangerous. The choice, it seemed, was no longer hers to make. Emma led Maya through the house with the confidence of someone who memorized every creak in the floorboards, every trick of light and shadow. The storm outside had reached full fury, wind howling around the Victorians' bones, while snow piled against the windows like nature's attempt to seal them inside permanently. "They've been trying to tell us for weeks," Emma explained as they walked, her small hand warm in Maya's cold fingers. "But grown-ups don't listen the same way kids do. You think everything has to make sense."
Maya wanted to argue, to insist that yes, things should make sense, that 8-year-olds shouldn't be talking about ghostly ladies with the same casual tone most children use to discuss playground friends. But standing in the hallway outside the library, looking at the bookshelf she'd moved to block the hidden door, she found herself listening instead. "They're not scary," Emma continued, seemingly oblivious to Maya's internal struggle. "They're just stuck. Like when you lose something really important and you keep looking for it in the same places over and over, even though you know it's not there." Maya moved the bookshelf aside, revealing the door that led to the basement room with its carved symbols and jars of mysterious contents. "Emma, I don't think we should go down there. That room, it doesn't feel safe." But Emma was already opening the door, her movements sure and unhesitant. "It's not the room that's dangerous, Mama. It's what people don't understand about it." The stone steps felt different this time, less ominous and more expectant. Maya's flashlight revealed the same shelves lined with jars, the same bundles of dried herbs, the same symbols carved into the ancient walls. But Emma walked straight to the far corner, where Maya now noticed something she'd missed in her previous terror, a modern addition to the ancient room. A metal detector leaned against the wall, its cord wrapped neatly around the handle. Beside it sat a surveyor's notebook, pages filled with careful measurements and sketches. And on a small table that looked like it had been salvaged from upstairs, a hand-drawn map of the property with dozens of small X marks scattered across it. "Great Aunt Lily knew," Emma said simply, running her finger along the map's careful notations. "She spent years looking, but she was looking in the wrong places. She was looking for what the ladies lost, but they weren't trying to show her that. They were trying to show her what was already here." Maya picked up the notebook, Lily's spidery handwriting filling page after page with measurements, dates, observations, metal detection readings across the entire property, soil samples taken from dozens of locations, references to geological surveys and historical maps, and something called the Donnelly Survey of 1889. "I don't understand," though part of her was beginning to. Emma climbed onto a wooden crate to reach one of the higher shelves, retrieving a manila folder that looked much newer than anything else in the room. Inside, Maya found photocopied documents from the Illinois State Historical Society, newspaper clippings from the 1890s, and a geological survey that made her breath catch. The survey, dated 1889 and signed by someone named Patrick Donnelly, showed their property in remarkable detail. But it wasn't the surface features that made Maya's hand shake as she held the paper. It was what lay beneath. According to Donnelly's measurements and calculations, their 37 acres sat directly on top of what the survey described as a significant limestone cave system, depth estimated at 40 to 60 feet, with multiple chambers extending in all directions. The survey noted unusual mineral deposits and geological formations consistent with limestone caves found in more southern regions. But it was the handwritten note in the margin, in Lily's careful script, that made everything click into place. Not a cave system, not natural. Check Millbrook Township Incorporation Records, 1891, 2 years after Donnelly's survey. Why the delay? Maya sank onto the wooden crate Emma had been standing on, her mind racing. "Emma, how did you know about this?" "The ladies told me. They've been trying to tell everyone for so long, but nobody listens to ladies who died a long time ago." Emma spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "They wanted me to show you the map." She pointed to another document Maya had missed, a hand-drawn map that looked much older than the geological survey, drawn on parchment that felt fragile as butterfly wings. The map showed the same property, but with features that no longer existed, or rather, features that had been deliberately hidden. Buildings, dozens of them, scattered across the acreage in a pattern that looked almost like a small town, and connecting them all, a network of tunnels marked in red ink with notations in a language Maya didn't recognize. Jeremiah didn't disappear. He hid. They all did. Maya stared at her daughter. Who all did it? Instead of answering directly, Emma pulled out one more document from the folder, a photocopy of a newspaper article from the Chicago Tribune dated October 15, 1891. The headline read, "Millbrook Township Incorporated after resolution of land disputes." But the smaller article below it made Maya's world shift. Missing persons case closed. Authorities have concluded their investigation into the disappearance of 47 residents of the former settlement known as New Harmony. The sheriff's office cites evidence of planned relocation to Western Territories. No foul play suspected. 47 people. An entire settlement that had vanished from official records, written off as voluntary relocation when something else entirely had happened. "They didn't relocate," Maya whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "They went underground." Emma nodded solemnly. "Great Aunt Lily figured it out, but she was too old to do anything about it. She needed someone younger, someone with a little girl who could hear the ladies properly." Maya's hands shook as she set down the documents. "Emma, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying there's a whole town under our house, Mama, and the people who built it left something behind that's worth a lot of money." The phrase hit Maya like a physical blow. Worth a lot of money. How could an 8-year-old understand concepts that Maya was barely grasping herself? But Emma was already moving, leading Maya to yet another corner of the basement room where Maya now saw what she'd somehow missed before. A modern laptop computer, its screen dark but its power light glowing green. "Great Aunt Lily bought this special," Emma explained, her small fingers moving over the keyboard with surprising competence. "For the ground radar program. She said the government used to use these to find things underground, but now regular people can buy them if they know where to look." The computer came to life, revealing a desktop cluttered with files labeled with dates and coordinates. Emma double-clicked on one labeled Final Survey, December 2023, and the screen filled with what looked like a 3-dimensional map of their property. But this map showed 2 levels, the surface they knew, and something vast and complex beneath it. Maya found herself staring at the underground network that spread far beyond their property lines. Chambers and tunnels and spaces that formed a pattern too organized to be natural, too extensive to be anything simple. "It's not just a hideout," Maya breathed, beginning to understand the scope of what they were looking at. "It's a whole settlement, preserved underground for over a century." Emma nodded, scrolling through more files. "And look what they left behind." The next image on the screen was a photograph taken with modern digital equipment in what appeared to be one of the underground chambers. Maya could see stone walls, wooden support beams that looked remarkably well preserved, and along the walls, shelves. Hundreds of them, lined with objects that caught the camera's flash like captured starlight. "Great Aunt Lily got inside," Emma explained, her small fingers moving over the keyboard with surprising competence. "For the ground radar program. She said the government used to use these to find things underground, but now regular people can buy them if they know where to look." The computer came to life, revealing a desktop cluttered with files labeled with dates and coordinates. Emma double-clicked on one labeled Final Survey December 2023, and the screen filled with what looked like a 3-dimensional map of their property. But this map showed 2 levels, the surface they knew, and something vast and complex beneath it. Maya found herself staring at the underground network that spread far beyond their property lines. Chambers and tunnels and spaces that formed a pattern too organized to be natural, too extensive to be anything simple. "It's not just a hideout," Maya breathed, beginning to understand the scope of what they were looking at. "It's a whole settlement, preserved underground for over a century." Emma nodded, scrolling through more files. "And look what they left behind." The next image on the screen was a photograph taken with modern digital equipment in what appeared to be one of the underground chambers. Maya could see stone walls, wooden support beams that looked remarkably well preserved, and along the walls, shelves. Hundreds of them, lined with objects that caught the camera's flash like captured starlight. "Great Aunt Lily got inside," Emma explained. Her fingers moored around the keyboard with surprising competence. "She found the entrance 3 years ago, but she was too sick to explore much. She took pictures, though. Look." Photo after photo scrolled past underground rooms filled with furniture, artwork, books, and, most remarkably, objects that looked like they belonged in museums. Silver that hadn't tarnished in the underground environment. Pottery that appeared ancient and valuable. Paintings in frames that suggested serious money. But it was the final photograph that made Maya's breath catch entirely. A single chamber, smaller than the others, with walls lined floor to ceiling with wooden crates. Stenciled on the sides of the crates, barely visible in the photograph, were words that made Maya's heart race. U.S. Mint, Denver, 1891. "Emma," I said slowly, "are those?" "Silver dollars," Emma finished. "Lots and lots of silver dollars. Great Aunt Lily counted 27 crates before she got too tired to keep going. She looked up how much old silver dollars are worth, and she wrote it all down." Emma opened another file, this one a simple text document filled with Lily's careful calculations. Maya read over her daughter's shoulder, her disbelief growing with each line. 1891 Morgan silver dollars, average auction value $125 to $500 each depending on condition. Estimated 500 coins per crate based on mint documentation. 27 crates equals approximately 13,500 coins, conservative estimate, assuming average condition $1,687,500. If coins are uncirculated mint condition, $6,750,000. Additional artifacts and artwork, value unknown but potentially significant. Total estimated value $2 to $10 million minimum. Maya stared at the number until it lost all meaning. $95 million. Buried beneath their feet for over a century, waiting for someone to piece together the clues that Lily had spent years assembling. "The ladies weren't trying to scare us," Emma said softly. "They were trying to help us. They knew we needed money, and they wanted us to find what they'd been guarding all this time." Maya's mind raced through the implications. The strange accidents, the supernatural encounters, the way the house seemed determined to keep them there. None of it had been malicious, it had been protective. The spirits of the settlement women, still watching over their community's treasure after all these years, making sure it ended up in the right hands. "But, Emma," Maya said slowly, "how do we know any of this is real? How do we know Lily's calculations are right?" Emma smiled, the expression far too knowing for an 8-year-old face. "Because Great Aunt Lily already took some of the coins to get them checked. The man in Chicago told her they were real and worth even more than she thought." She opened one final file, a scan of an authentication certificate from a numismatic expert in Chicago. Maya read it twice before the words sank in. Authentication report, 1891 cc Morgan silver dollar, near uncirculated condition. Market value, $7,200 to $8,500. Rarity, extremely high. Historical significance, exceptional. This coin represents one of the finest examples of Carson City Mint 1891 Morgan dollars we have examined. Below that, a handwritten note from Lily. If one coin is worth $8,000 and we have $13,500, Emma and Maya will never have to worry about money again. The house will have served its purpose. Maya felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't have said whether they were from relief, disbelief, or overwhelming gratitude to a great-aunt she'd barely known, but who had apparently spent her final years ensuring that Maya and Emma would have the security she'd never been able to provide. "The ladies are happy now," Emma said matter-of-factly. "They can rest. They've been waiting so long for the right people to find the treasure, people who would use it for good things instead of just being greedy." Maya pulled Emma close, holding her daughter tight while her mind tried to process the magnitude of what they'd discovered. Not just financial security, generational wealth, college funds and house repairs, and the freedom to make choices based on what they wanted rather than what they could afford. "But Emma," Maya said slowly, "how do we actually get to it? The underground chambers, the coins, how do we access them safely?" Emma wiggled out of her arms and returned to the computer, pulling up a file labeled Access Routes. The screen showed a detailed map of their property with 3 different entrances marked in red. Great-Aunt Lily found all the ways in. The main entrance is in the old root cellar behind the house. There's another one in the barn foundation and a third in the woods near the property line. She marked them all so we'd know where to start. Maya stared at the map, trying to comprehend that beneath their snowy acreage lay a preserved 19th century settlement, complete with one of the most significant coin finds in American history. The settlement that had vanished from public records, the people who had chosen to disappear rather than face whatever had driven them underground. "Why?" Maya asked finally. "Why did they go underground? What were they hiding from?" Emma's expression grew serious. "Great-Aunt Lily tried to find out, but the records are all missing or changed. She thinks maybe they were involved in something the government didn't approve of. Maybe they were helping people who needed to hide, or maybe they had beliefs that weren't popular. But whatever it was, they decided to disappear instead of fight." I thought about the courage it must have taken. 47 people choosing to abandon the world above ground, to create a new life in darkness rather than compromise whatever principles had put them at risk. The determination required to build an entire community beneath the earth, to preserve not just their lives, but their values and their wealth for future generations. And they've been waiting all this time. "Waiting for family," Emma confirmed. "Waiting for people who would understand that some things are more important than money, even when you really need money." Maya looked around the basement room with new eyes. Not a place of dark mysteries, but a library, a research center, a gift from one generation to the next. Lily had spent years down here, piecing together the puzzle, preparing everything so that when the right moment came, when her family needed it most, the treasure would be ready to be claimed. The storms upstairs seemed to be calming, the wind no longer howling with quite the same fury. Maya realized that the house's supernatural disturbances had stopped as well. No more mysterious sounds, no more cold spots, no more sense of being watched by unseen eyes. The ladies, as Emma called them, had accomplished their mission. The treasure was found, the family was safe, and after more than a century of guardianship, they could finally rest. "What happens now?" Maya asked her daughter. Emma smiled, the expression bright with possibilities. "Now we fix the house. We make it beautiful again, the way it used to be. We use the money to help other people who need help. And we tell the story of the people who lived underground so everyone knows how brave they were." Maya nodded, understanding flooding through her like sunrise after the longest night.
This wasn't just about financial security, it was about legacy, about family, about understanding that sometimes the best gifts come from the most unexpected places. Tomorrow, she would call experts, archaeologists, historians, numismatists, who could help them access the underground settlement safely and legally. She would document everything, preserve the story of New Harmony and its 47 vanished residents who had chosen to become guardians of the future rather than victims of their past. But tonight, she held her daughter close and marveled at the gift they'd been given. Not just wealth, but purpose, and the knowledge that sometimes the universe conspires to help those who need it most, even when that help comes from voices that have been silent for over a century. The inheritance hadn't been cursed after all. It had been blessed, patient, and perfectly timed to arrive exactly when they needed it most. Spring arrived early that year, as if the earth itself was eager to witness the resurrection happening above and below ground. Maya stood in the restored sunroom, watching Emma chase butterflies through gardens that hadn't bloomed in decades, and marveled at how much had changed in the 4 months since they'd discovered the treasure beneath their feet. Dr. Sarah Mitchell from the University of Chicago had been the first expert to descend into the underground chambers, and Maya would never forget the expression on her face when she emerged 3 hours later, her hands literally shaking as she tried to describe what she had seen. "It's a complete 19th century settlement," Dr. Mitchell had said, her voice filled with academic awe, preserved almost perfectly by the underground environment. "We're looking at original furniture, artwork, personal belongings, books, tools, an entire community frozen in time. This isn't just valuable financially, it's invaluable historically." The authentication process for the coins alone had taken 6 weeks. Teams of numismatic experts had carefully cataloged each crate, photographed every coin, and confirmed what Lily's research had suggested. They were indeed holding one of the largest collections of 1891 cc Carson City Morgan silver dollars ever discovered, most in mint or near mint condition. The final valuation had been staggering even by Maya's inflated expectations. $127 million. Not just the $95 million they'd hoped for, but significantly more once the additional artifacts, artwork, and historical significance were factored into the equation. Through careful research and documentation found in the underground chambers, they'd pieced together the truth about New Harmony. The settlement had been a station on the Underground Railroad, one of the most northern and well-organized stops in Illinois. The 47 residents hadn't been ordinary pioneers. They'd been abolitionists, escaped slaves, and sympathetic families who had created a community dedicated to helping others find freedom. When federal marshals had begun investigating Underground Railroad activities in the area in 1891, the entire community had made the extraordinary decision to disappear rather than risk exposure that might endanger the people they'd helped. They'd spent months preparing their underground refuge, moving their most valuable possessions below ground, and then simply vanished from public record. Most had eventually relocated to Canada or Western territories, but they'd left their treasure behind as a legacy for future generations of their families like Maya and Emma, who might someday need the resources to continue their work of helping others. They weren't just preserving wealth, they were preserving hope. The evidence suggests they believed their descendants would carry on their mission of helping people in need, and they wanted to ensure those descendants had the means to do so effectively. The legal proceedings had been surprisingly straightforward. As direct descendants with clear title to the property, Maya and Emma had undisputed claim to everything found on their land. The state of Illinois had negotiated to house the historical artifacts in a new Underground Railroad museum, but the financial assets belonged entirely to the Chen family. Maya stared at the bank statements for weeks, unable to process the numbers. The idea of having millions of dollars felt surreal, almost paralyzing.
But even after all the donations, after all the taxes and legal fees, Maya and Emma had more money than they could spend in several lifetimes. More importantly, they had purpose. "Mama, look!" Emma's voice carried across the garden, pulling Maya from her reflections. Her daughter was kneeling beside the newly planted vegetable beds where the first tomato plants were showing tiny green shoots. "They're growing already." Maya walked out to join Emma, breathing in air that smelled of rich soil and possibility. The gardens were Emma's project. She'd spend hours with the landscape architects, designing spaces that would provide food for their family and surplus for the local food bank. At 8 years old, Emma had developed strong opinions about social responsibility and the importance of sharing abundance. The house itself had been completely restored, though Maya had insisted on preserving its Victorian character while updating everything for modern safety and efficiency. The sunroom had been converted into the art studio Maya had dreamed of, with floor-to-ceiling windows that captured light throughout the day. Her canvases lined the walls now, landscapes of their property, portraits of Emma, and increasingly historical paintings that told the story of New Harmony. The tower room had become Emma's personal library and study space, filled with books about history, archaeology, and social justice. Maya often found her daughter up there in the evenings, reading about other communities that had made sacrifices for the greater good, taking notes in the serious way of children who understand they've been entrusted with something important. Mrs. Patterson called this morning, Maya told Emma as they examined the growing plants together. The school board approved funding for the new science wing. Construction starts this summer. Emma beamed. The Millbrook Elementary School renovation had been one of their first major contributions to the community, funded through the foundation they had established. Emma had insisted that the new science labs include equipment for ground-penetrating radar and archaeological research, convinced that other children might discover important historical sites if they had the right tools. "And the museum?" Emma asked. "Opening ceremony is scheduled for June 15th. Dr. Mitchell says they finished installing the underground chamber replica, and the exhibit about the Underground Railroad is ready for visitors." The New Harmony Museum had become Maya's most personal project. Built on a corner of their property with public access, it told the story of the 47 people who had chosen courage over safety, community over individual comfort. Visitors could experience a replica of the underground chambers, learn about the Underground Railroad in Illinois, and understand how ordinary people had made extraordinary sacrifices to help others. But Maya's favorite part of the museum was Emma's contribution, a children's interactive exhibit that taught young visitors about recognizing when people need help and finding age-appropriate ways to make a difference. Emma had insisted that the museum shouldn't just be about history, it should inspire action. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Emma asked as they walked back toward the house. Tomorrow was the official opening of the museum, which would bring media attention and visitors from around the country. Maya considered the question. 6 months ago, the thought of being in the public eye would have terrified her. She was a single mother working double shifts just to keep a roof over her head, invisible and powerless in a world that seemed designed to keep her struggling. Now she was the founder of a multi-million-dollar foundation, a published author whose book about the New Harmony discovery had become a bestseller, and a spokesperson for historical preservation and social justice causes. The transformation still felt surreal sometimes. "Not nervous," Maya said finally. "Ready. There's a difference." They settled on the front porch swing that Maya had installed where Great Aunt Lily used to sit, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. The same colors Maya now captured in her paintings, the same light that had inspired Lily to spend decades creating art in her attic studio. "I've been thinking about the ladies," Emma said, using her old term for the spirits that had guided them to the treasure. "Do you think they're really at peace now?" Maya pulled Emma closer, breathing in the scent of her daughter's shampoo and the evening air heavy with the promise of summer. "I think they accomplished what they set out to do. They protected their community's legacy for over a century, and they made sure it ended up with people who would use it the way they would have wanted to. To help other people." "To help other people," Maya confirmed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Maya thought about the journey that had brought them here, the eviction notice that had seemed like the end of the world, the inheritance that had seemed more like a burden than a gift, the supernatural encounters that had terrified her before she understood their purpose. Every challenge had been leading them toward this moment, this place, this understanding of what their lives were meant to become. "Mama?" Emma said softly. Do you think we'll stay here forever? Maya looked out over the property that had become so much more than home. The restored Victorian house with its tower room and wraparound porch. The gardens that would feed their family and their community. The museum that would educate visitors about courage and sacrifice. The foundation offices in the converted barn, where a small staff worked to identify and support modern anti-trafficking efforts around the world. This place had become the center of everything they were building, everything they hoped to accomplish. But more than that, it had become the place where they'd learned they were capable of much more than either of them had ever imagined. I think, Maya said carefully, that this is our place. Not because we have to stay, but because we choose to. Because this is where we can do the most good. Emma nodded, satisfied with that answer. The ladies chose well, she said, with the matter-of-fact wisdom that never stopped surprising Maya. As full darkness settled over the property, Maya found herself thinking about Great Aunt Lily, alone in this house for 63 years, patiently researching and preparing for the day when the treasure would be needed. Lily had never married, never had children of her own, but she'd understood that family extended beyond individual generations, that love could be expressed through sacrifice for people she would never meet. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Mitchell. Final artifact count complete. Total historical items preserved, 2,847. You should be proud. This is the most comprehensive underground railroad site ever discovered. Maya smiled, typing back, Lily should be proud. We just finished what she started. But even as she sent the message, she knew it wasn't entirely true. Lily had started the work, yes, but Maya and Emma were continuing it in ways that the older woman never could have imagined. The foundation was funding rescue operations in 12 countries. The scholarship program was sending former trafficking victims to college. The museum was inspiring thousands of visitors to think about their own capacity for moral courage. They hadn't just inherited money from the people of New Harmony, they'd inherited responsibility, and they were rising to meet it. Time for bed, baby, Maya said, though neither of them moved to go inside. 5 more minutes, Emma pleaded. I want to see if the ladies come out tonight. Maya didn't correct her daughter's persistent belief that the spirits of New Harmony still walked the property on clear nights. Whether or not it was true, Emma's conviction that they were still being watched over by benevolent ancestors had given her a sense of security and purpose that Maya wouldn't disturb. Besides, sometimes Maya thought she saw them too. Shadows moving with intention near the tree line, the sense of approval when she made decisions that honored the community's values, the feeling of being part of something larger than herself and Emma. Look, Emma whispered, pointing toward the woods where the moonlight seems to gather and shift in ways that might have been wind through leaves or might have been something else entirely. Maya looked, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw figures in old-fashioned dress standing at the edge of the clearing watching the house with expressions of contentment. A community of guardians, finally able to rest because their long vigil had ended successfully. Thank you, Maya whispered, not caring if she was talking to the wind or to spirits or to her own grateful heart. The figures, if they had ever been there, faded into shadow and starlight, leaving only the peace of a spring evening and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Tomorrow would bring reporters and visitors, ceremonies and speeches, the controlled chaos of public attention. But tonight was theirs, Maya and Emma and the legacy of New Harmony, all of them finally home. Okay, Emma said, stretching and yawning. I'm ready for bed now. They walked into the house together, leaving the porch light on for anyone who might need to find their way home. Inside, the Victorian mansion that once felt haunted now felt simply blessed. Every room filled with the warmth of family and purpose. Maya tucked Emma into the tower room bed, surrounded by books about heroes and history makers, beneath windows that looked out over the property where 47 people had once built something worth preserving for over a century.
Sweet dreams, baby. Dream about tomorrow.
I will, Emma promised, already half asleep. I'll dream about all the good things we're going to do. Maya kissed her daughter's forehead and made her way to the master bedroom, where she could see the lights of the museum construction through the window. In 6 weeks, visitors from around the world would come to learn about courage and community, about ordinary people who had done extraordinary things. And at the center of it all would be Maya and Emma, living proof that sometimes the best gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that family legacies could be about much more than money or property or the things that could be counted. They could be about love that transcended generations, about purpose that gave meaning to prosperity, and about the understanding that true inheritance wasn't what you received from the past, but what you chose to build for the future. Maya fell asleep thinking about tomorrow's possibilities, while somewhere in the walls of the old house the echoes of long-ago laughter seemed to whisper their approval into the spring night. The inheritance was complete, but the legacy would continue forever. And that was exactly as it should be. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, carried by a postal service that had no idea it was delivering another twist in a story that had begun over a century ago. Maya found it mixed in with the Foundation's regular correspondence, the envelope bearing the return address of a law firm in Denver, Colorado. Emma, now 19 and home from her sophomore year at Northwestern University, where she was double majoring in archaeology and social justice, looked up from her laptop where she was working on a paper about modern trafficking patterns. Her research had taken her to 12 countries in the past 2 years, following the same routes that had once carried people to freedom through stations like New Harmony. "What is it, Mom?" Emma asked, noting the expression on Maya's face as she read the letter. Maya sank into the chair across from her daughter in what had once been Lily's library and was now the heart of their Foundation's research center. The walls were lined with books about history and social justice, artifacts from the underground chambers, and Emma's childhood drawings that Maya had never been able to throw away. "It's from the estate of someone named Margaret Donnelly," Maya said slowly. "Patrick Donnelly's great-granddaughter. Apparently, she passed away last month and left specific instructions that if anyone named Chen ever inquired about the 1889 Geological Survey, this letter should be sent to them." Emma's eyes widened. Patrick Donnelly? The surveyors whose work had been crucial to understanding the underground chambers, whose maps had helped Lily piece together the location of the treasure. Maya opened the inner envelope with hands that trembled slightly, unfolding pages of careful handwriting that looked remarkably similar to the survey notes they'd found in Lily's research. "My dear Chen family, if you are reading this, then you have found what my great-grandfather helped to hide, and the long circle is finally complete." Emma moved to sit beside her mother, both of them reading the letter together. "My great-grandfather, Patrick Donnelly, was more than just a surveyor. He was a trusted friend of the New Harmony community, and when they made the decision to disappear from public record, he helped them plan their underground refuge. The geological survey he filed with the state was deliberately misleading. He reported natural limestone caves where he knew perfectly well that an entire settlement had been constructed. Patrick understood that someday, when it was safe, the families of New Harmony would need to reclaim what they had left behind. He kept detailed records of the true layout, the access points, and most importantly, the additional cache that even your great-aunt Lily never discovered. Maya's breath caught. Additional cache? Emma was already reaching for her laptop, fingers flying over the keyboard as she pulled up the digital maps they'd created of the underground settlement. "Mom, look at this! We always wondered why the tunnel system extended so far beyond the living areas. We thought maybe they were planning expansion. But what if—" "What if there's more?" Maya finished. The letter continued. "The 27 crates of coins that you found were meant to sustain the community during their underground years. But the real treasure, the fund they established for continuing their work, was hidden separately, in a location that could only be accessed once the first cache had been discovered and properly used. Patrick's maps show a sealed chamber beneath the original settlement, accessible only through a passage that requires 2 keys. One key was hidden with the coins you've already found. The second key was given to my family for safekeeping, with instructions to pass it down until the Chen family claimed their inheritance. If you are reading this letter, it means you have proven yourselves worthy of New Harmony's complete trust. You have used your inheritance not for personal gain, but to continue the work of helping others. The community's founders would be proud. The second key is enclosed. Use it wisely." Maya looked at Emma, seeing her own mixture of excitement and apprehension reflected in her daughter's face. They'd thought their treasure-hunting days were over. The underground settlement had been thoroughly explored, documented, and converted into the museum that now attracted visitors from around the world. Maya had written 2 books about the discovery, and Emma had chosen her academic path based on their experiences. Their lives had found a rhythm of purpose and prosperity. The foundation had grown into an international organization that had helped rescue and rehabilitate thousands of trafficking victims. Emma's scholarship program had sent over 200 former victims to college. The New Harmony Museum had become a pilgrimage site for people studying courage and moral action. But apparently, their story wasn't finished. "There's a key in here," Emma said, reaching into the envelope to retrieve a small brass object that looked similar to the skeleton key that had first opened their front door, but more ornate, covered in symbols that matched the carvings they'd found in the underground chambers. Maya turned the letter over, finding a hand-drawn map on the back that showed their property with new details, a passage that began in the deepest part of the settlement and led to something marked simply as the archive. "What do you think is down there?" Emma asked. Maya studied the map, thinking about everything they'd learned about the New Harmony community over the past decade. These had been people who thought generations ahead, who planned for scenarios they hoped would never occur. If they'd hidden something beyond the coins and artifacts, it would be something they considered even more valuable than silver and gold. "Information," Maya said suddenly. "Records, names and routes and safe houses, everything they knew about the Underground Railroad network." Emma's eyes lit up with understanding. Documentation that could help historians map the entire system, names of people who were never officially recorded, routes that were never written down, families who helped but were never recognized. And if that documentation still exists, Maya trailed off, thinking about the implications. It would be invaluable for genealogical research, for understanding the full scope of the Underground Railroad, for honoring people whose contributions were lost to history. Emma was already reaching for her phone. "We need to call Dr. Mitchell." But Maya caught her daughter's hand. "Wait, let's think about this. The letter says the chamber can only be accessed with 2 keys. We have one now, but where's the other?" Emma frowned, mental wheels turning. "The letter mentions it was hidden with the coins we already found, but we cataloged everything from those crates. Silver dollars, some jewelry, a few documents." "The documents," Maya said suddenly. Lily's research notes mentioned documents found with the coins, but they were so fragile that they were sent for preservation before we could properly examine them.
The preserved documents from the original discovery were housed in the climate-controlled archives beneath the museum, available for researchers but rarely accessed because they were still being slowly restored by specialists. Maya and Emma made their way through the museum's public areas, past displays that told the story they'd lived, past the replica underground chambers where visitors could experience what it might have been like to live beneath the earth. Maya never failed to feel a sense of pride when she saw children Emma's age leading tours, sharing the story of New Harmony with the same passion Emma had shown at 9 years old. The archive entrance required 2 key cards and a biometric scanner, security that seemed excessive when they'd installed it, but made more sense now that they potentially held documents of national historical significance. Dr. Mitchell met them in the preservation lab, her gray hair now completely white, but her enthusiasm undimmed by the years. "You know, I always suspected there was more to find. The way that tunnel system extended beyond the living areas, the references and some of the personal letters we found, it suggested the community was planning for something bigger than just temporary refuge." The documents from the original coin discovery filled 3 preservation boxes. Most were personal letters, inventory lists, and diary entries that had provided valuable insight into daily life in the underground settlement. But Maya now examined them with new eyes, looking for anything that might be a key or a clue to a key.
It was Emma who found it, in a leather portfolio that had been too delicate to unfold when they'd first discovered it. Years of careful preservation work had finally made it accessible, and inside was a single sheet of parchment with what appeared to be a map of the property. But when Emma held it up to the light, Maya could see that it was more than just a map. It was 2 sheets of parchment, pressed together, with different images on each side visible only when light passed through both layers. "It's like a transparency overlay," Emma breathed. "Look, when you line them up like this." The combined images showed the familiar layout of the property, but with additional markings that hadn't been visible on either sheet alone. And there, drawn in the center of what corresponded to the underground settlement, was the outline of a key. "It's not a physical key," Maya realized. "It's a pattern, the shape we need to create to unlock the chamber." Dr. Mitchell studied the overlapping maps with professional fascination. "It looks like a combination of the carved symbols from the underground chambers. If you trace the pattern shown here," she followed the lines with her finger, "you'd need to touch specific carvings in a particular sequence." Emma was already pulling up the detailed photographs of the underground chamber walls on her tablet, cross-referencing the symbols shown on the parchment with their documented locations. "I can map this out. If we're right about the pattern, we could have the sequence figured out by tomorrow." Maya felt the familiar mixture of excitement and responsibility that had characterized every major decision over the past decade. They'd learned to be cautious with discoveries that could impact not just their family, but the historical record and the communities they served. "Dr. Mitchell, if we do this, if we find this archive, we need to do it right. Full documentation, proper preservation protocols, legal clarity about ownership and access." "Of course," Dr. Mitchell agreed. "But Maya, if this archive contains what I think it might contain, we're talking about one of the most significant historical discoveries of our lifetime. Documentation of underground railroad activities that was contemporary to the period, preserved in ideal conditions, created by people who are actually running stations." Emma looked up from her tablet. "And if there are names, families, routes that were never officially recorded, think about how many people could finally learn about their ancestors' contributions. How many family histories could be completed?" Maya nodded, understanding the weight of what they were potentially about to uncover. The silver dollars had secured their financial future and allowed them to build something meaningful. But this discovery could secure the historical future, preserving stories that might otherwise be lost forever. "All right," Maya said. "We do this, but we do it carefully, with full documentation and with the understanding that whatever we find belongs to more than just our family." The next morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of October day that made Maya grateful they'd chosen to build their life in this place. Emma had worked late into the night, mapping the symbol sequence from the parchment overlay, creating a step-by-step guide for opening what they hoped was the archive chamber. Dr. Mitchell had assembled a small team of graduate students and preservation specialists, all sworn to confidentiality until they could properly assess and document whatever they might find. Maya found herself thinking of Lily, working alone in her basement research center, painstakingly piecing together clues that would take decades to fully understand. The entrance to the underground settlement had been modified over the years to accommodate museum visitors, with proper lighting, stable walkways, and safety equipment. But the deeper passages, beyond the public access areas, remained exactly as they'd been found, rough stone walls carved with symbols that had guided Maya and Emma to their first treasure a decade ago. The entrance to the underground settlement had been modified over the years to accommodate museum visitors, with proper lighting, stable walkways, and safety equipment. But the deeper passages, beyond the public access areas, remained exactly as they'd been found, rough stone walls carved with symbols that had guided Maya and Emma to their first treasure a decade ago. The chamber that corresponded to the map's location was one they'd cataloged but never fully explored, accessible only through a narrow passage that had seemed to dead end in solid rock. But Emma's pattern analysis suggested that the dead end was actually a sealed door, designed to look like natural stone to casual observation. "Here," Emma said, running her hands over the wall where the symbols are carved. "According to the pattern, I touched this one first, then this one, then—" Maya held her breath as Emma traced the sequence shown on the parchment overlay. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding sound that spoke of mechanisms that hadn't moved in over a century, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a passage that led deeper into the earth. The air that flowed out was cool and dry, carrying the scent of old paper and preservation, the smell of a library that had been sealed away from the world for generations. Emma's flashlight beam revealed a chamber unlike anything they'd found in the rest of the settlement. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with filing cabinets, document boxes, and what appeared to be a complete printing operation. Typesets, paper stocks, and binding equipment that would have allowed the community to produce official-looking documents.
But it was the far wall that took Maya's breath away, covered in maps that showed not just Illinois, but the entire network of Underground Railroad routes from the Deep South to Canada. Routes marked in different colors to show safe passage, dangerous areas, seasonal variations, and contact points that spanned hundreds of miles and dozens of states. "My God," Dr. Mitchell whispered, her professional composure finally cracking. "This is the master archive. They didn't just run a station. They were coordinating major portions of the entire network." Emma was already photographing everything, her training in archaeological documentation serving her well. "Mom, look at this. These aren't just maps. They're updated maps. See the dates? Some of these changes were made right up until the community disappeared. They were actively managing routes, updating information, coordinating with other stations." Maya moved to one of the filing cabinets, pulling open a drawer that was filled with individual folders, each labeled with a name and date. "These are records of everyone who passed through, not just numbers, names, families, where they came from, where they were going, what kind of help they needed." The scope of what they were looking at was staggering. Thousands of individual records, maps that showed safe houses they'd never heard of, communication networks that extended far beyond what any historian had previously documented. And all of it preserved in nearly perfect condition by the underground environment. There's something else I called from the back of the chamber. A whole section of financial records. It looks like New Harmony wasn't just helping people travel through, they were financing other stations, sending money and supplies to communities all along the network. Maya joined her daughter at a desk where ledger books lay open, their pages filled with careful notations of funds sent and received, supplies purchased and distributed, salaries paid to conductors and safe house operators throughout the Midwest. They were running a business, Maya realized. The silver dollars weren't just their emergency fund, they were the bank for a significant portion of the Underground Railroad network. Dr. Mitchell was studying a wall map that showed the network at its peak, with New Harmony clearly marked as a central coordination point. This explains so much about patterns we've never understood in the historical record, routes that seem to appear and disappear, safe houses that operated far longer than should have been economically possible, coordination between stations that were hundreds of miles apart. Emma was reading from one of the personal journals they'd found, her voice filled with admiration. "Listen to this. Today we received word that the Baltimore route will require additional funding through the winter months. James suggests we increase our silver shipment by 20%. Sarah argues for 30%, saying we cannot place economics above human life. I agree with Sarah. We will send 30% and find other economies if necessary." Maya felt tears gathering as she listened to Emma read. These weren't just historical figures anymore. They were real people making difficult decisions with limited resources, choosing again and again to put the needs of strangers above their own comfort and safety. "And here," Emma continued, flipping pages, "the Chen family has agreed to expand their property holdings to include the Miller farm to the south. This will give us access to the old mining tunnels, which should provide safe passage even if the main routes are discovered. Little Constance Chen will inherit leadership of the network when she comes of age, should anything happen to the current generation." Maya's breath caught. Constance Chen. That was Jeremiah's daughter, my great-great-grandmother. The pieces of family history clicked into place. The inheritance hadn't started with Lily's bequest to Maya. It had been passed down through 5 generations of women who were expected to carry on the work of helping others, each generation adapting the mission to meet the needs of their time. "Mom, I think I understand now why Great-Aunt Lily never had children of her own, why she waited so long to pass the inheritance on. She was waiting for the right time, the right crisis, the right family situation where the resources would be needed most." "What happens now?" Maya asked Dr. Mitchell. The archaeologist was still studying the master map, her expression one of professional awe. "Now we document everything, we preserve it all, and we share it with the world, because this information can help thousands of families understand their histories, help historians map the full scope of the Underground Railroad, and honor the contributions of people who risked everything to help others." Emma looked up from the journal she was reading. "And we continue the work. Not the Underground Railroad, that battle was won, but the mission, helping people who need safe passage from danger to safety. We've been doing it with the foundation, but now we understand it's not just our choice, it's our family's legacy." Maya felt the weight of inheritance settling around her shoulders again, but this time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like coming home to a purpose that was bigger than her individual life, older than her personal struggles, and more important than anything she could have chosen for herself. They spent the rest of the day carefully cataloging and photographing the archive, each discovery adding new pieces to a puzzle that had been incomplete for over a century. By the time they emerged from the underground chambers, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky in the same golden colors that had inspired both Lily and Maya to capture the beauty of this place in their art. Emma walked beside Maya toward the house, both of them quiet with the weight of what they discovered. The archive would take years to fully process and understand. The historical implications would reshape scholars' understanding of the Underground Railroad.
And somewhere in those records were probably the names and stories of thousands of people whose contributions had been lost to official history. "Do you think they knew?" Emma asked as they reached the front porch. "The New Harmony community? When they decided to hide the archive, do you think they knew it would take more than a century for their families to find it?" Maya considered the question as they settled onto the porch swing, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "I think they knew that important work sometimes takes generations to complete. They planted seeds they knew they'd never see grow, made sacrifices for people they'd never meet, preserved information for families they'd never know. Like Lily," Emma said, "spending 63 years researching and preparing for us." "Like Lily," Maya agreed, "and like you, choosing to study archaeology and social justice because you want to continue the work." Emma leaned against her mother's shoulder, both of them comfortable with the silence that had settled between them. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, new discoveries to process, new decisions about how to honor the legacy they'd inherited. But tonight was for understanding, for gratitude, and for the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd found their way to exactly where they belonged. "Mom," Emma said eventually, "do you think there are other families out there? Other descendants of Underground Railroad workers who might have inherited similar legacies without knowing it?" Maya hesitated, still uncomfortable with Emma's assumption that they should take on more responsibility. Part of her wanted to focus on their own healing, their own adjustment to this new life. Probably. Why? Because maybe part of our mission should be helping them discover their own family histories, using what we've learned to help other people find the treasures their ancestors left for them. Financial treasures? Purpose treasures, Emma corrected. Understanding that they come from people who chose courage over comfort, community over personal safety. That's worth more than money. Maya pulled her daughter closer, marveling again at the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to Emma, as if she'd inherited not just financial resources and historical responsibility, but also the moral clarity that had driven their ancestors to risk everything for strangers. "I think that's exactly what we should do," Maya said. "Build something that helps other families discover their own legacies of service." As if summoned by their conversation, a gentle breeze moved through the trees around the property, carrying with it the sense of approval that Maya had learned to associate with moments when their plans aligned with the intentions of the people who had built New Harmony. The house settled into its nighttime quiet behind them, no longer haunted by restless spirits, but blessed by the peaceful presence of ancestors whose work was finally being continued by people who understood its importance. Maya and Emma sat on the porch until the moon rose full and bright above the trees, talking about plans and possibilities, about the responsibilities that came with privilege, and the importance of using inherited wealth to create opportunities for others. By the time they went inside, they had sketched out the framework for a new program that would help families research their own Underground Railroad connections, provide resources for communities wanting to preserve their historical sites, and create educational opportunities for young people to learn about moral courage through their own family histories. It would be called the New Harmony Project, and it would ensure that the work begun by 47 brave people in 1891 would continue for generations to come. Maya fell asleep that night thinking about circles, how the treasure that seemed like an ending had become a beginning, how the inheritance that felt like an accident had revealed itself to be part of a carefully planned legacy, how the family history she'd barely known had become the foundation for everything meaningful in her life. Somewhere in the walls of the old house, in the tunnels beneath their feet, in the archives that held the names and stories of thousands of forgotten heroes, the echoes of purpose whispered their approval into the autumn night. The circle was complete, but the work would continue forever. The New Harmony Project's first conference drew participants from 37 states and 12 countries. Maya stood at the podium in the main hall of what had once been their barn, now converted into a state-of-the-art conference center, looking out at an audience that included genealogists, historians, descendants of Underground Railroad workers, and families who had discovered their own hidden legacies. 6 months ago, Maya began, my daughter Emma asked me a question that changed everything. She wondered if there were other families like ours, families whose ancestors had left them more than property or money, families whose inheritance included a mission. Emma, now serving as the project's youngest research coordinator, sat in the front row next to Dr. Mitchell and a panel of experts they'd assembled from universities across the country. At 19, Emma had already proven herself capable of managing research initiatives that would challenge graduate students twice her age.
"Look at this," Emma said, pulling up a digitized letter on one of the computer screens. It's from Sarah Thompson to Constance Chen, dated March 1890. Listen. "My dearest Constance, young Samuel Thompson has shown remarkable aptitude for the work, displaying the same courage and quick thinking that marked his father's contributions. I believe he will make an excellent conductor when he comes of age. I pray that if anything should happen to Thomas and myself, Samuel will find his way to families like yours who understand the importance of the mission." Marcus leaned closer to read the letter himself. "Samuel Thompson was my great-grandfather. I never knew anything about him except his name." "According to the records," Maya said, "Samuel continued his parents' work well into the 20th century, helping families displaced by industrial accidents and economic disasters. The Underground Railroad work evolved, but it never stopped." Emma pulled up another document. "And look at this, a letter from the 1940s where Samuel writes about helping Jewish families escape persecution using some of the same routes and safe houses his parents had established 50 years earlier." Marcus studied the screen, his expression growing more amazed with each revelation. "So the work really did continue. My family really did keep helping people." "Your family and our family," Maya corrected gently. "According to these records, the Thompson and Chen families worked together for over 80 years. You're not just connected to this history, Marcus, you're family." The formal adoption proceedings would take months to complete, but Maya had already moved Marcus into the tower room that had once been Emma's exclusive domain. Emma had insisted, saying that the room needed someone who understood its history and would treat it with the respect it deserved. That evening, after the conference attendees had departed and the house had settled into its familiar quiet, Maya found herself on the front porch with Emma and Marcus, all three of them exhausted but exhilarated by the day's events. "I've been thinking," Marcus said, his voice carrying the kind of seriousness that Maya had learned to pay attention to, "about expansion, about what comes next." Emma looked interested. "What kind of expansion?" "International expansion," Marcus said. "The Underground Railroad was just one network in one country during one time period. But people have been helping other people escape persecution throughout history, all over the world. What if the New Harmony Project could help families in other countries discover their own legacies of resistance and rescue?" Maya felt that familiar stirring of excitement that came with recognizing a truly important idea. "You're talking about Holocaust rescue networks, resistance movements, refugee assistance programs?" "Exactly," Marcus said. "My research into my own family led me to stories about the network of people who helped Jewish families escape Nazi persecution. Some of those same families later helped Vietnamese refugees in the 1970s and Central American refugees in the 1980s. The work never stopped. It just adapted to new crises." Emma was already pulling out her phone, taking notes. "We could partner with international genealogy organizations, with museums and historical societies in other countries, help people understand that their ancestors weren't just victims or bystanders. They were often heroes." Maya nodded, thinking about the resources they now had available.
The original treasure from New Harmony was just the beginning. The archive discoveries had brought international attention and significant donations from individuals and institutions interested in supporting historical research. The New Harmony Foundation now had an endowment that could sustain their work for generations. It would be a massive undertaking, Maya said slowly. We'd need partnerships with universities, with governments, with communities that might not trust outsiders coming in to research their histories. But we'd also be giving people something invaluable, Marcus pointed out. Connection to their heritage, understanding of what their families sacrificed, recognition for contributions that were never officially acknowledged. Emma looked up from her phone. And we'd be creating a global network of families who understand that they inherited more than property or money. They inherited responsibility for continuing the work of helping others.
Maya felt the weight and the excitement of possibilities settling around her. 3 years ago, she'd been a struggling single mother facing eviction with no understanding of her family history beyond the basic facts. Now she was contemplating an international initiative that could help thousands of families around the world discover their own legacies of courage and service. "All right," Maya said finally, "let's do it. But we do it right, with proper cultural sensitivity, with local partnerships, with respect for communities that might have good reasons for keeping some stories private." Marcus grinned, the expression transforming his serious face. "So, we start with research, identify potential partner organizations, communities that might be interested, families that have already begun discovering their own hidden histories. And we start with what we know," Emma added. "The archived correspondence mentions contacts in Canada, in England, in several European countries, people who were part of the same international network of resistance and rescue." Maya nodded, already envisioning the complexity and the potential impact of what they were proposing. It could take decades to develop properly. "Good," Marcus said simply. "The best work always does." They sat on the porch until well past midnight, talking through possibilities and challenges, mapping out a vision that was ambitious enough to honor the legacy they'd inherited and practical enough to actually accomplish. By the time they went inside, they had outlined a 5-year plan for international expansion, identified potential funding sources, and begun drafting partnership proposals for organizations in 7 countries. Maya tucked both Emma and Marcus into their respective rooms, a ritual that felt natural, despite the fact that both of them were old enough to take care of themselves. Emma was heading back to Northwestern in a few weeks for her junior year, but she'd arranged her schedule to spend extensive time at New Harmony, treating the foundation work as her practical laboratory for her academic studies. Marcus would be starting his senior year of high school in Millbrook Township, living at New Harmony while completing his education and working part-time with the foundation's research team. He'd already proven himself capable of genealogical research that rivaled graduate-level work. Maya made her way to the master bedroom, pausing at the window that looked out over the property where 5 generations of her family had helped others find safety and freedom. The museum buildings were dark now, but she could see the lights from the research center where their growing staff continued working on projects that would help families around the world understand their own legacies of courage. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Mitchell. "Preliminary results from the Berlin archives suggest we may have identified 3 more Underground Railroad coordinators with international connections. Can we schedule a video conference with the German Historical Society tomorrow?" Maya smiled, typing back, "Absolutely. Emma and Marcus will want to participate too." Another text, this one from Marcus, found documentation suggesting the Thompson family had contacts in Ireland who helped famine refugees in the 1840s. Might be worth investigating. And finally, a text from Emma. "Mom, I've been thinking about what Marcus said about international networks. What if we're not just discovering the past? What if we're rebuilding connections that were broken by time and circumstance? What if we're recreating the global network of families committed to helping others?" The idea was both thrilling and daunting, But as Maya drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about the letter they'd received from Margaret Donnelly, about the careful planning that had preserved the New Harmony archive for over a century, about the way the right discoveries seemed to arrive at exactly the right moments. Maybe the universe, or the persistent spirits of people who had dedicated their lives to helping others, was still orchestrating events, still making sure that resources found their way to people who would use them responsibly. Maybe the work of New Harmony had never really ended. Maybe it had just been waiting for the right generation to understand its scope and potential. Maya fell asleep thinking about tomorrow's video conference with German historians, about the possibilities for connecting families across continents, about the legacy that kept expanding every time they thought they'd reached its boundaries. Outside, the Illinois prairie stretched towards horizons that seemed limitless under the star-filled sky. And somewhere in the underground chambers beneath their feet, the echoes of history whispered encouragement to the living who had chosen to carry their work forward into an uncertain but hopeful future. The circle that had begun with 47 brave people choosing courage over safety had grown to encompass thousands of families across dozens of countries, and it was still expanding, still drawing in people who needed to understand that they came from heroes, that they inherited the obligation to be heroes themselves.
The treasure beneath their feet had been worth $95 million. But the treasure they were building together, the network of families committed to helping others, the understanding that privilege meant responsibility, the knowledge that courage was hereditary, that treasure was beyond price. And it would continue growing one family at a time, one discovery at a time, one act of courage at a time, for as long as there were people who needed help and families willing to provide it. The work would never be finished, and that was exactly as it should be.
Maya's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Mitchell, now in her 70s but still leading archaeological expeditions. Just received confirmation. The site in Romania has been authenticated. Medieval documents showing systematic assistance to religious refugees over a 200-year period. The local families are requesting network partnership to establish a research center. Another message, this one from a government official in Canada. Parliament has approved the Heritage Recognition Act. Families who can document ancestors' participation in Underground Railroad activities will receive official recognition and support for preservation efforts. Thank you for making this possible. And finally, a text from a teenager in Brazil whose great-grandmother had hidden Jewish refugees during World War II. Grandmama's stories were true. We found the room. We found the documents. We found the purpose. When can I apply for the exchange program? I want to learn how to continue the work. Maya set her phone aside and looked around the tower room that had become the headquarters for something she couldn't have imagined when she'd first climbed those stairs as a desperate single mother facing eviction. Emma was scheduling video conferences with researchers in 7 countries. Marcus was coordinating scholarship applications from young people who had discovered their family legacies and wanted to carry them forward. The work that had begun in a basement room filled with Lily's patient research had grown into a global network of families, united by the understanding that their ancestors' courage was not just historical fact, but contemporary calling. "You know what I realized today?" Maya said to Emma and Marcus, both of whom looked up from their respective projects. "Great-Aunt Lily didn't just leave us treasure, she left us a map, not to silver dollars hidden underground, but to a way of living that honors the past while building the future." Emma smiled. "And every family we help discover their legacy adds to that map, creates new paths for other people to follow." Marcus nodded. "The network isn't just about genealogy or historical research. It's about understanding that courage is hereditary, and that every generation gets to choose whether to inherit it." Maya looked out the window at the property where 5 generations of her family had worked to help others, where hundreds of families had now gathered to discover their own legacies, where thousands more would come in the years ahead to understand that they inherited not just the stories of heroes, but the obligation to be heroes themselves. The treasure beneath their feet was worth $95 million. The network they'd built together was worth something beyond price. The knowledge that when good people leave you something, they're trusting you to use it well, and that the best way to honor that trust is to help others discover their own capacity for courage. Somewhere in the walls of the old Victorian house, in the underground chambers that had preserved one community's story for over a century, in the hearts of families around the world who were learning that they came from heroes, the echoes of purpose whispered their approval into the gathering dusk. The inheritance was complete, but the legacy would continue forever. And that was exactly as it should be. Thank you for following this incredible journey of discovery. If stories like this inspire you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads about hidden family treasures and life-changing inheritances.